The air in the Scriptorium Mortis was not merely cold, it was a preserved chill, a deliberate stasis that seeped from the ferrocrete walls and the endless rows of black iron shelves. Here, the dust did not dance in the rare beams of light from the lumoglobes far overhead. It settled, a gray shroud over cases of parchment, data slates etched on forbidden alloys, and stone tablets whose carved sigils seemed to shift if stared at for too long. Archivist Tertius moved through the silence, his soft-soled boots making no sound, the rustle of his gray robes like the whisper of a dying man's last breath. His world was one of measured paces, of cataloged doom, of memories that were not his own, yet lived within him like ghosts. His current task was a new arrival, a thing of tarnished silver and obsidian, sealed with wax that bore the imprint of the Ordo Hereticus. The accompanying scroll, penned by a hand trembling with either fear or urgency, gave no name, only a designation. Asterisk, Specimen Theta 9. Contagious cognitohazard, memory vector. Sanctioned for deepest sequestration. Asterisk. Tertius felt the familiar, icy trickle of dread in his veins, a sensation as routine as the numbness in his fingers from the cold. He was a warden of such things. His life was a testament to careful, beautiful ignorance. With ritual precision, he activated the isolation plinth, a pillar of black stone encircled by a faintly humming null field. He broke the seal, the crack echoing in the vast, silent chamber. The container opened not with a hinge, but with a soft, psychic sigh that made the lumen above him flicker. Inside, resting on a bed of bleached felt, was a simple, smooth river stone. It was gray, unremarkable, still slightly damp as if just pulled from a stream. It held no inscription, no visible rune. It was utterly mundane, and therefore, in this place of curated horrors, it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. The protocol was absolute, no direct sensory engagement. He manipulated it with servo claws mounted on the plinth, transferring it to a stasis casket for permanent filing. As the stone left its felt bed, he saw a single word, handwritten on the underside of the lid in a simple, elegant script. A name, Avalos. The moment his eyes processed the shapes of the letters, the stone on the claw moved. It was not a physical motion. It rippled, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a falling leaf. And for a fraction of a second, it was not a stone at all, but a human eye, wide and staring directly into his soul. Tertius staggered back, breaking protocol, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He blinked. The stone was just a stone again, clamped in the servo claw. The eye was gone, but the memory of it was not. It was now his memory. He could feel it. A hot, foreign coal embedded in the cold ash of his mind. He saw, in a flash that was not sight, a green sky. He felt warm mud between his toes, a sensation so alien in this sterile crypt it was vomitous. He heard laughter, a child's laughter, pure and bright, a sound that had no right to exist in the galaxy. He completed the procedure on autopilot, his hands moving with trained efficiency while his mind screamed. The stasis casket sealed with a final hiss, entombing the stone and its whatever it was. The record was updated. Asterisk Specimen Theta 9. Secured. No incident. Asterisk. He lied. It was his first sin. The rest of his shift was a blur of gray shelves and silent terror. The memory of the eye did not fade. It grew. It unpacked itself. That night, in his sparse cell, Archivist Tertius dreamed not of the stone, but of Avalos. He saw a world of gentle rains and vast fungal forests glowing with soft bioluminescence. He saw a people, human, but their lives were not of toil and prayer. They were of observation, of quiet contemplation. They were rememberers. They held no written history. Instead, they used stones like the one in the casket Nemoliths to store perfect, lived memories of events, of people, of moments of beauty and sorrow. Avalos was one of them, a young man with kind eyes, training to become a keeper. The memory was not a recording, it was experience. Tertius felt the damp air, the peace of the community, the profound, unshakable belief that to remember was to honor, that nothing truly died if its memory was cherished. He woke with tears on his face, a saltwater testament to a paradise that felt more real than his own bleak existence. In the days that followed, the memory contagion worked its silent poison. It was not a violent takeover. It was a seductive comparison. The austere, fearful dogma of the Imperium, where memory was a threat to be controlled, history a weapon to be locked away, clashed violently with the beautiful living history of Avalos. Tertius began to see the scriptorium not as a sacred repository, but as a cemetery of truth. Every sealed file was a murder. Every classified datum was a soul in chains. The weight of his complicity, once a bearable burden, became a crushing mountain. He found himself drawn back to the stasis casket. He would stand before it, not opening it, just listening. And the memory within listened back. It offered more, not just the beauty of Avalos, but his end. The Imperium had come to Avalos's world, drawn by rumors of unsanctioned psychers. They found no witches, only rememberers. The ecclesiarchy declared their memory sharing a form of demonic possession, a contamination of the pure, isolated human soul. The Astra Militarum followed. Tertius, through the shared memory, felt the last bolts cut down the unarmed rememberers as they tried to explain, their hands holding nothing but smooth, memory-laden stones. He felt Avalos's terror, his confusion, his desperate attempt to save the central Mnemosyne vault, not to hide it, but to show the Imperial commander the truth, the beauty of their way. The commander, a man whose mind was a fortress of pure, unthinking doctrine, saw only a Xenos-tainted archive. He ordered it burned. The final memory was the heaviest. As the fires raged, Avalos, cornered, his family dead, performed a forbidden act of desperation. Using a technique meant only for peaceful transfer, he poured the totality of his people's memory, their entire history and their horrific extermination, into a single, plain riverstone, a final, furious act of remembrance. He imprinted it not with data, but with the raw, catastrophic truth of the event, along with the poignant, damning contrast of the life that had been lived before. Then he hurled it into a stream, a final prayer that someone, someday, would see. That stone was Specimen Theta 9. Tertius was no longer just an archivist. He was now the sole, unwilling rememberer of a murdered culture. The knowledge didn't just live in his mind. It festered, it wept, it screamed. He looked at his colleagues dull-eyed, careful men and women who had long ago surrendered their curiosity to fear. He saw, not dedicated servants of the Imperium, but accomplices to a galaxy-spanning crime of forgetting. The forbidden knowledge did its work. It killed not by synapse failure or cerebral hemorrhage, but by the simple, unbearable weight of truth. It made the reality of the Imperium the necessary cruelty, the sacred ignorance unlivable. To remember Avalos was to understand the profound, beautiful thing the Imperium had destroyed in its blind, fearful crusade. And that understanding was a terminal diagnosis. The Scriptorium Mortis had become a gilded cage, its silence now a scream held behind clenched teeth. Every classified scroll Tertius handled felt like a piece of grave cloth. Every data slate was a tombstone. The memory of Avalos was no longer a discrete set of images. It had become a filter through which he perceived his entire world, staining it with a tragic, luminous clarity. He moved through his duties like an automaton. But inside, the peaceful songs of the Rememberers echoed against the grim, chanting dirges of the Imperial Creed, and the latter were losing. They sounded hollow, fearful, and ugly. He began to make mistakes. Small, almost imperceptible lapses in the sacred protocols. He would delay sealing a stasis field for 3 extra seconds, staring at the artifact within, wondering what beautiful or terrible truth it held prisoner. He misshelved a folio on the predicted gestation cycles of the tyrannid bioship Jormungandr, not through carelessness, but because a part of him, poisoned by the memory of Avalos's green world, felt a perverse thrill at the slight rebellion against perfect order. The fear that should have accompanied these slips was absent, drowned out by a louder, more profound horror, the horror of his own life's purpose. The breaking point came during a routine audit by a senior archivist. a withered man named Vorlon, whose face was a roadmap of skeptical frowns. They were verifying the containment seals on a collection of heretical pict captures from the Gara Nebula. Vorlon's thin, rasping voice cut the air. Note the degradation of the psychic residue on Capture 7-6 Alpha. The heretic's despair is fading. In another century, it will be safe for junior acolytes to view, a testament to our holy work of purification through time. Tertius, holding the data slate, felt the words like physical blows. Purification through time. He saw not a sanitized record, but the living moment of the heretic's death, a man who, in the memory flash granted by the stone, might have had reasons, a family, a fragment of truth the Imperium could not abide. To erase the pain, the context, the why of his despair was not purification. It was a second murder. It was the exact opposite of what the Rememberers of Avalos had done. The despair is the most important part, Tertius heard himself say, his voice strange in his own ears. To remove it is to misunderstand the event entirely. The silence that followed was thicker and heavier than the scriptorium's normal quiet. Vorlon turned his head with a slow avian precision. His eyes, magnified by his optolenses, were pale blue discs of ice. Explain that statement, Archivist Tertius. The dam within Tertius, strained by the flood of foreign memory, cracked. We don't archive truth here, he said, the words tumbling out hot and urgent. We archive the Imperium's approved narrative. We take events of profound complexity, of suffering and meaning, and we strip them down to data points of threat and doctrine. We don't preserve history. We embalm its corpse and call it sanctity. Vorlon took a step back, not in fear, but in the manner of a master toxicologist observing a promising new plague. You are speaking of the Rememberers of Theta 9, he stated, his voice devoid of all emotion. The cognito hazard has manifested. I had wondered when your behavioral deviations would crystallize into outright heresy. Tertius felt a cold that had nothing to do with the air. They had been watching him. Of course they had. The scriptorium watched everyone. His moment of perceived rebellion had been cataloged, studied, and was now being filed under containment procedure. You call it a hazard, Tertius whispered, the memory of warm rain on his face so vivid he could almost smell the petrichor. They called it life. They held their entire existence in their hands, shared it, learned from it. What we fear isn't daemons or xenos, Vorlon. We fear understanding. We fear empathy. Because if we ever truly felt what we have done, the weight of it would annihilate us. That, Vorlon said, pulling a small silver device from his robe, a sus and membrane inducer, designed to induce immediate biological stasis, is precisely why the Ordo Hereticus sanctioned that memory for sequestration. It is not the knowledge that kills Tertius, it is the weakness it cultivates. The failure of resolve. The Imperium cannot be built on the shaky foundation of understanding its enemies. It is built on certainty, on forgetting that which does not serve its survival. He advanced. Tertius was not a fighter. He was a curator of the apocalypse. But as Vorlon moved, a final perfect memory from Avalos blossomed in his mind. Not of death, but of a teaching. A young rememberer being shown how to receive a memory stone. You do not fight the current. You let it flow through you. You are the riverbed, not the dam. Tertius didn't lunge for Vorlon. He didn't try to run. He stood still, and as Vorlon reached for him, Tertius did the only thing the memory had taught him to do with a truth too heavy to bear alone. He focused on the core of the Avalos memory, the green world, the laughter, the warm mud, the searing injustice of its end, and with a desperate, silent effort, he did not remember it. He projected it. He pushed the raw, emotional truth of it, the catastrophic, beautiful weight, directly at Vorlon's mind. Vorlon froze. The inducer clattered to the floor, its sound shockingly loud. His eyes, behind their lenses, went wide. His mouth opened in a small O of shock. He was not seeing Tertius. He was seeing green skies, feeling alien mud, hearing a child's laugh, and then he was feeling the searing heat of Prometheum, the psychic scream of a dying race. the doctrinal certainty of the Imperial commander that felt, in the face of such gentle beauty, like the most monstrous evil in the universe. A single clear tear traced a path through the dust on Vorlin's withered cheek. Then another. He made no sound. He simply stood, trembling, as the living memory, the forbidden knowledge that kills by being remembered, poured into him. His certainty, his lifetime of meticulous, fearful archiving, was being washed away by a river of truth he had spent his career helping to bury. He did not die of a stroke or a seizure. He died as his fundamental understanding of reality collapsed in on itself. His legs gave way, and he slumped to the floor, alive but utterly, irrevocably broken. His mind a shattered vase that could no longer hold the water of Imperial truth. He wept silently, curled on the cold stone, lost in a paradise that had been rendered into hell by the very institution he served. Tertius looked down at his superior, then at the stasis inducer on the floor. The scriptorium's silence was now an accusatory witness. They would come for him. The fear finally returned, cold and sharp. But it was a clean fear, a fear of physical consequence, not the gnawing, existential dread that had been his companion since opening Theta 9. He had shared the memory. He was no longer its sole bearer. In doing so, he had confirmed the Imperium's deepest, most justified fear, that some truths are viruses, and empathy is their vector. The scriptorium's detection systems were not keyed to sound or motion, but to deviations in prescribed ritual. The prolonged, unchanging biometric signature of Senior Archivist Vorlin, a man who should have been moving, cataloging, breathing with measured efficiency, triggered a silent, amber-grayed alert in the warden's spire. Tertius knew this. The knowledge was as ingrained as the layout of the shelves. He had minutes, perhaps less. He did not run towards the exit. That was the impulse of a thief, and he was not stealing a thing. He was becoming one. He turned and walked, not with haste, but with the deliberate pace of an archivist on a somber errand, deeper into the heart of the Scriptorium Mortis. The rows of black iron stretched into darkness, the lumo globes becoming farther apart, their lights swallowed by the sheer, oppressive weight of sequestered history. This was the deep stack, where they kept the truth so terrible they were not even given names, only algorithmic sigils that changed every solar hour. The memory of Avalos was a quiet engine inside him now, no longer a source of paralyzing anguish, but a grim compass. It did not guide him toward hope, there was none, but toward a terrible, final logic. The Imperium feared its archivists, because an archivist, truly perceiving the monster he served, might do exactly what Tertius was about to do. He was not fleeing to survive. He was walking towards a greater act of remembrance. He reached a junction where the architecture changed. The iron shelves gave way to walls of raw, psychic-dampening basalt. Here the air tasted of ozone and static, the hum of powerful stasis fields, a sub-audible thrum in the teeth. This was the oubliette of echoes, a vault within a vault, reserved for cognitohazards of the highest order. The door was a single, seamless slab of black stone, engraved with the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. There was no handle, no key. Access was a sacrament of misery, requiring a drop of blood from a sanctioned psyker and 3 spoken syllables of High Gothic that changed with the tides of the warp. Tertius was neither psyker nor inquisitor, but he carried a memory that was. Avalos's people had not been psykers in the imperial sense. They did not draw power from the Empyrean. They resonated with the psychic echoes of lived experience, the imprints left on reality by moments of intense emotion. It was a subtle, profound difference. As he stood before the door, Tertius did not try to recall a password. Instead, he closed his eyes and immersed himself in the most potent, emotional echo he now possessed. The final, unified scream of the Rememberers as the flames took the Mnemosyne vault. It was not a memory of sound, but of pure, unadulterated loss, a psychic shockwave of grief and injustice. He placed his palm against the cold stone. He did not speak. He remembered. He focused every fiber of his being on that catastrophic sorrow, letting it flow from him, a silent, desperate broadcast. The black stone drank it in. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grating sound of rock on rock that had not been heard for centuries, the door slid sideways into the wall. A puff of ancient, sterile air washed over him. The hum of stasis fields grew louder. Inside, the chamber was small, lit by a single, ghostly beam of light from above. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of clear crystal, floated a shard of something that hurt the eyes to look upon. It was not of this reality. It was a fragment of a concept, a fossilized piece of a daemon's true name, and its mere presence whispered of infinite deserts of despair. This was not his goal. Arrayed on simple shelves along the walls were other items. A mirror that showed not a reflection, but the moment of the viewer's death. A lullaby etched on a child's rib bone that compelled the listener to seek the peace of the grave. And there, in a plain stasis casket identical to the one in the main stack, was specimen Psi Alpha. The label was simple: the first memory, origin, terra, ante, millennial. Do not perceive. This was the heart of the fear. This was why the edicts existed, why the Scriptorium Mortis was built. Not to keep Imperial secrets from enemies, but to keep the Imperium's own foundational truths from its servants. The knowledge that kills simply by being remembered. Tertius approached Psi Alpha. He knew he was being monitored now. The open door would have triggered a cascade of crimson-level alerts. Silently, in the Warden's spire, armed custodians in encephalic damping helmets would be mobilizing, their minds sealed against the very concepts this room contained. He had mere moments. He did not open the casket. He didn't need to. His act was not one of theft, but of communion. He placed his hands on the cool surface of the casket. He thought of Avalos's world, its stolen beauty. He thought of Vorlon, weeping on the floor, broken by a single, gentle truth. He thought of the mountains of forgotten pain lining the shelves outside. He gathered all of it: the stolen beauty, the inflicted suffering, the ocean of silenced screams, into a single, focused point of acknowledgement. He was an archivist. His final act would be one of perfect, catastrophic cataloging. Then, he turned his mind inward to the Memory Stone's gift. He found the technique Avalos had used in his final moment, not to transfer a memory gently, but to imprint it with the force of a dying wish. Tertius was not a rememberer. He was a conduit, flawed and human. He poured everything Avalos's paradise, its horrific end, Vorlon's shattered faith, his own lifetime of complicity into a single psychic burst. But he aimed it not at a stone. He aimed it outward, at the Scriptorium itself, at the psychic resonance of the millions of forbidden memories pressed together in this one terrible place. He was not powerful. His signal was a whisper, but he was whispering into a cavern already vibrating with silent screams. His act was the pebble that begins the avalanche. The Lumo globes in the oubliette of echoes brightened to a painful, blinding white, then exploded in showers of crystal. The stasis fields fluctuated. A harmonic wail, felt in the mind and not the ears, pulsed through the basalt walls and out into the main stacks. On the shelves, stasis caskets began to chime, a dissonant, rising chorus of waking ghosts. Data slates flickered to life, displaying images they were never meant to show again. Parchments yellowed and crumbled to dust in seconds, their hidden words released into the air in a final exhalation. Tertius fell to his knees, blood streaming from his nose and ears, the backblast of his own desperate act scouring his mind. He had not opened Psi Alpha. He had not needed to. He had simply reminded every other forbidden truth in the vault that it, too, was a memory. And in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, some memories have a will of their own. The door to the oubliette slammed shut, sealing him inside with the first memory and the echoing, awakened chorus of a million buried truths. Outside, in the now chaotic darkness of the Scriptorium Mortis, the carefully curated silence was gone, replaced by a growing, psychic storm of everything the Imperium had ever commanded its servants to forget. The psychic shockwave did not travel like sound. It propagated through the Scriptorium Mortis as a corruption of silence, a resonant frequency that found its twin in every sealed container, every suppressed truth. In the main aisles, Archivist Secundus Alara was reviewing a shipment manifest when the data slate in her hands grew warm. The screen, filled with dry inventory codes, dissolved into a cascade of screaming, static-laced pict captures. A xenospecies of crystalline beauty being systematically shattered by Mechanicus mining lasers. The betrayed face of an Imperial Guard general, as the Inquisition declared his victorious army excommunicate traitores for knowing too much. The private, agonized doubts of a living saint, scrawled in her own blood on the walls of her sanctum. Ilara gasped, the slate clattering to the floor as the forbidden images seared themselves into her memory. She clutched her head, a sharp pain stabbing behind her eyes. The knowledge did not kill her instantly. It simply made the next line of the manifest she tried to recall standard ration pack. Type 4, impossible to remember, overwritten by the taste of alien blood amber and the sound of shattering quartz. Deep in the restoration chamber, a tech acolyte was meticulously repairing a water-damaged scroll from a flooded hive's archives. As the tremor passed, the ancient ink on the parchment did not fade. Instead, it reconfigured. The official report of a successful gene tithe from the world of Lyra III bled away, and in its place emerged the desperate, hidden subtext, written in lemon juice and now revealed by psychic heat, a chronicle of the planet's resistance, of families hiding their children, of the final, hopeless stand in the gene harvestry's loading bays. The acolyte stared, his hands trembling. He had been taught to preserve the physical document. He had no protocol for when the document itself changed to tell a different, truer story. He began to weep, not understanding why. The sorrow of a world he had never known flooding into him. The storm was not uniform. It was a cascade of individual tragedies, each archivist confronting the specific poison they had spent a lifetime curating. For some, it was a single, overwhelming image that broke their spirit. For others, it was a subtle, insidious shift in understanding, a sudden, horrifying comprehension of the context behind a dry military report, turning a glorious victory into a massacre of innocence. The scriptorium, a place built on controlled, sacred ignorance, was experiencing a simultaneous, uncontrolled epiphany. In the warden's spire, the air was filled with the shriek of alarm runes and the frantic, filtered voices of the custodian teams. Cognitive breach in Sector Theta, containment fields failing, psychic backwash in the Hall of Annulled Edicts. Acolytes they're just sitting and screaming, sir. Warden Kyrus, a man whose face was a leathery mask over a skull of adamantine conviction, watched the hololithic schematics of his domain flash with spreading blooms of crimson light. He had feared a physical incursion. Genstealer cults, demonic manifestation. This was worse. This was the infrastructure itself turning against them. The very memories were revolting. All custodians. His voice was a gravelly boom, unshaken by the chaos. Encephalic dampeners to maximum. Do not look at any archive material. Do not listen to any sounds, not from your squad vox. Your mission is no longer containment of artifacts. It is purification of personnel. Any archivist displaying contamination, mind wipe, or termination. The scriptorium's structural integrity must be preserved at all costs. He knew what this was. He had read the reports on Specimen Theta 9, a memory vector. He had authorized its deep storage. The culprit was obvious. Archivist Tertius. The thought was a cold fury in his gut, a weak link in the chain, a man who had allowed sentiment to override dogma, and in doing so, had activated a chain reaction. Kyrus rose from his command throne, hefting a massive, psi-shielded maul. The warden's final duty was not to his charges, but to the sanctity of the vault. He would personally excise the infection at its source. Sealed within the oubliette of echoes, Tertius was only partially aware of the chaos he had unleashed. The feedback from his desperate act had left him broken. Sensory input, a blur of pain and ringing silence. He was propped against the crystal pedestal, the daemon name shard pulsing with a malevolent light above him. Blood, thick and dark, dripped from his ears and nose, pooling on the flawless floor. But his mind, though fractured, was clear in one respect. The memory of Avalos was quiet now. A spent candle. Its work was done. He could feel the other memories in the room, though. They pressed in not as images, but as atmospheres. The despair from the daemon shard. The cold, curious hunger from the death mirror. And from the casket labeled Psi Alpha, a profound gravitational weight. It was the silence before a verdict, the emptiness after a world-ending scream. It was not a memory to be seen, but a hole in history to be fallen into. The door groaned. With a shriek of tortured stone, it was forced open not by code, but by the application of brute force and sanctified plasma cutters from the other side. Warden Kyrus filled the doorway, his armor scarred and ancient, his maul crackling with null energy. His helmet's gaze swept the room, past the dangerous artifacts, and locked onto the broken form of Tertius. Archivist. Kyrus's voice was distorted by his helm's vox. Grill, devoid of anything but finality. You have allowed weakness to betray your oath. You have unleashed a pestilence of doubt. Your sentence is oblivion. Tertius looked up, his vision swimming. He did not see an executioner. He saw, through the lens of 1,000 now-awakened truths, another servant, just as trapped, just as afraid. A man who had chosen to defend the prison walls rather than question why he was inside them. You think you're preserving the Imperium? Tertius rasped, each word effort. You're just preserving the fear. The first memory. He gestured weakly towards Psi Alpha's casket. It's not a weapon. It's a question, and you're all so terrified of the answer. Heresy to the last, Kyrus stated, stepping into the room. The null field from his maul caused the lights to dim and the whispering presences in the room to recoil. There are no questions, only truth and falsehood. The Emperor's truth. He raised the maul. Tertius did not flinch. He had no strength left. Instead, he turned his head, his blood-filled eyes not on Kyrus, but on the plain stasis casket. He did not try to remember anything. He simply stopped trying to forget. He opened his mind, shattered and raw as it was, and offered it as a final vessel, not to project, but to receive. As Kyrus brought the maul down in a killing arc, the stasis field on specimen Psi Alpha didn't fail. It invited. The casket remained sealed, but the memory within it, the memory that kills simply by being remembered, flowed out. It did not need light or sound. It was the absence that defines a shape. It was the unknowing that makes knowledge possible. It passed through Tertius first. He did not die screaming. He dissolved into a quiet, profound understanding. His body slumping finally to the floor, a faint, inexplicable peace on his ruined face. Then it reached Warden Kyrus. The maul stopped, an inch from Tertius's skull. Kyrus froze. Within his helmet, his eyes, shielded from physical and psychic harm, saw nothing new. But his mind encountered the first memory. It was not an image of the dark age of technology. It was not a record of the Emperor's great triumph or hidden shame. It was simpler and infinitely worse. It was the memory of the choice not to remember. It was the foundational, catastrophic moment when nascent humanity, reeling from old night, looked at the tapestry of its own horrific past and collective trauma, and instead of seeking to understand it, chose to forget it, to outlaw it, to build a civilization not on the hard-won lessons of history, but on a mandated, state-enforced amnesia. The Imperium was not built on a lie. It was built on a determined, terrified void. The God Emperor on his throne was not a guardian of knowledge, but the ultimate custodian of that void, the lighthouse warning all away from the shipwreck of true history. Kyrus understood, in a single, shattering instant, that every heresy he had burned, every truth he had locked away, every archivist he had mind-wiped, was not in service to a higher truth. It was in service to a primordial, galaxy-spanning failure of courage. The Imperium feared its own archivists because, deep down, it knew they were the ones closest to realizing that the entire edifice, from the palace on Terra to the lowest scribe, was a monument not to humanity's strength, but to its most profound, self-inflicted wound. The maul fell from his numb fingers. He did not cry like Vorlin. He did not slump like Tertius. He simply stood, a colossal statue of armor and shattered dogma. As the forbidden knowledge did its work, it killed his certainty. It killed his purpose. It killed the Warden, and left only a hollow man standing guard over a truth that had finally, fatally, been remembered. The silence that followed was not the old, curated silence of the scriptorium. That was gone forever. This was a new silence, heavy and pregnant. The quiet after a bomb has detonated and the world is waiting to see what remains standing. In the oubliette, only the faint hum of the Daemon Shard's stasis field persisted. Warden Kyrus remained motionless, a sentinel over the bodies of Tertius and the broken door. The psychic storm had passed. Its energy dissipated not by suppression, but by completion. It had been a scream, and the scream was now out. Out in the labyrinth, the storm's wake settled like a pall of metaphysical dust. Archivist Alara still sat on the floor, her fingers tracing meaningless patterns in the dust. The screaming images in her mind had faded to a persistent background ache, a migraine of the soul. She looked at her hands, at the familiar gray shelves, and saw them anew. They were not pillars of order. They were the bars of a cage she had lovingly polished her entire life. The knowledge she had witnessed did not drive her mad. It simply made her former sanity seem like a childish delusion. She stood, her movements slow, mechanical. She did not know where to go. The exit meant nothing, her duty meant less. She was, for the first time, truly lost. Elsewhere, the custodians moved through the stacks like ghosts in enameled armor. Their orders crackled over the vox, but the responses were growing sporadic, confused. They found archivists staring blankly at walls, whispering to unseen listeners, or sitting peacefully amidst scattered scrolls, their eyes full of a terrible, quiet clarity. The protocol was clear: mind, wipe, or terminate. But the scale was impossible, and a new insidious question had been planted in some of their own dampened minds. What was the point of wiping a mind clean, only to refill it with the same lies that had caused this catastrophe? The contamination was not a fire to be put out. It was a change in state. The Scriptorium Mortis had been a vault of dead secrets. Now, it was a graveyard where the dead had whispered their truths to the living, and the living could no longer pretend to be alive. Days passed, measured only by the dimming and brightening of the lumoglobes on their automated cycles. A fractured, hollow routine attempted to reassert itself. Senior archivists who had been marginally less affected, or whose minds had broken in a more functional way, tried to restore order. They ordered the gathering of scattered materials, the resealing of caskets, but it was a pantomime. When Archivist Finn, his hands trembling, tried to recatalog Specimen Theta 9's now empty casket, he found he could not write the words "contagious cognitohazard" without hearing a child's laughter in the back of his skull. He wrote "Lost Paradise" instead, then stared at the words as if they were written in an alien tongue. The deeper change was subtler. Archivists began to gather, not for ritual, but in quiet, furtive clusters in the refectory. They did not speak of what they saw. They didn't need to. They shared looks that spoke volumes. A glance at a water pipe could conjure the shared, unspoken memory of a drowned hive's final prayer, now known to 3 of them from 3 different corrupted sources. They were no longer individual wardens of separate truths. They were becoming a collective, wounded consciousness, a living archive of everything the Imperium had deemed unfit to remember. Their fear was no longer of the things on the shelves, but of the world outside that demanded they return to forgetting. A week after the breach, a signal was received, an astropathic ping, tight-beamed and encrypted. The Ordo Hereticus had been alerted by the silent, then wildly chattering, then profoundly silent psychic emanations from the Scriptorium. An inquisitorial audit team was inbound. ETA, 48 hours. The news acted like a stim shot of old, primal terror. The Warden's Spire, now commanded by a pallid junior custodian named Rorken, who had found Kyrus's body, broadcast the message. All personnel, prepare for purification and audit. Standard protocols for cognitive debriefing and readiness review are hereby in effect. The words purification and cognitive debriefing hung in the recycled air. They meant mind wipe. They meant the systematic, surgical removal of every new, terrible, beautiful truth they had all learned. It meant a return to the blessed, ignorant silence. That night, in a disused secondary cataloging chamber, a dozen archivists met. Their faces, lit by a single failing lumen, were drawn and ancient. "They will scrub our minds," said Laura, her voice hollow. "They will make us forget Avalos. They will make us forget the burned libraries, the hidden screams, the first memory. They will make us obedient again." "Is that not a mercy?" whispered Finn, wringing his hands. "To forget, the weight, to go back to not knowing?" An older archivist, named Gorvin, who had spent 60 years studying prohibited love poetry from the age of apostasy, shook his head. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "No, it would be a second death. For us, and for the memories themselves." Tertius did not unleash a weapon. He performed an act of remembrance, the most sacred act a thinking being can perform. To allow them to undo that is to betray him, to betray it. "What can we do?" another asked, the despair clear. "We are archivists, not soldiers. We cannot fight the Inquisition." Gorvin looked around the circle, at the faces of broken men and women who now held the galaxy's most dangerous truths in their fragile skulls. "We do what we were trained to do," he said, a strange, grim determination settling on his features. "We preserve the record. We ensure the knowledge is not lost." A plan formed, not from strategy, but from desperate instinct. They would not fight. They would not flee. They would archive. They would disperse. Each of them would take a single, specific, newly remembered truth, not an artifact, but the living memory of it in their mind, and they would hide it within the endless, labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Imperium itself. One would volunteer for a scribe transfer to a distant Munitorum depot. Another would request penitent service as a logister on a frontier world. A third would fake a mental breakdown that would see them shipped to a sanitarium, a place full of ignored whispers. They would become sleeper agents of truth, not to overthrow the Imperium, but to be living tombs for the things it had murdered. The knowledge would kill them, slowly, eating away at their peace, their sanity, their souls. But it would not be forgotten. The Imperium feared its archivists because they were the guardians of the void at the heart of the Imperial truth. Now, they would become something far more terrifying. They would become seeds. Seeds of memory, planted in the sterile soil of the Imperium's forgetfulness, waiting for a future that may never come, but ensuring that the past, in some small, tragic way, continued to live. As the inquisitorial black ship entered the system's edge, the Scriptorium Mortis awaited its auditors. On the surface, order was being frantically restored. Caskets were sealed, floors were cleaned, reports were fabricated. But beneath the frantic activity, a quiet, purposeful exodus had begun. Archivists, with new, terrible lights in their eyes, submitted transfer requests, packed sparse belongings, and prepared to carry their contagion out into a galaxy that would see only faithful servants, never guessing the fatal truths, ticking quietly inside their minds. The vault was breached, the silence was broken, and the memory, as it always does, found a way to persist. The black ship Judicious Penance hung in the void like a shard of obsidian, its shadow falling across the orbital way station that serviced the Scriptorium Mortis. Its arrival was not announced. It was an imposition, a fact that gravity accepted. Aboard, Inquisitor Valeria of the Ordo Hereticus watched the data streams from the preliminary scout servitors. The pick feeds showed a facility operating at nominal efficiency. Life signs were stable. Power signatures were consistent. On paper, the cognitive breach event had been contained, a localized incident with 2 casualties, an archivist and the warden both terminated. The reports, filed by a custodian Sergeant Rorkin, were crisp, orthodox, and utterly sterile. Valeria's lips, thin and pale, pressed into a tighter line. It was the sterility that betrayed the lie. A cognitohazard of the purported magnitude, a Specimen Theta 9 event, did not leave clean reports. It left ghosts in the data, psychic scar tissue, inconsistencies in the sub-audit trails. She had seen it before on the quarantine world of Lorca, where a mimetic phrase had turned an entire basilica choir into silent, smiling statues. The aftermath had been messy, filled with contradictory logs and the strange, poetic errors of contaminated scribes. This was too clean. This was a story someone had very carefully rewritten. "They are hiding the infection, not the breach," she stated to her interrogator. a severe man named Kale who wore his scars like medals. The physical integrity is maintained, but the human component is compromised. Standard purification protocols will fail. They have already adapted. Kale nodded, checking the charge on his psych-out grenades. A full purge, then? The facility is of high strategic value. Valeria rose from her command throne, her black power armor whispering, "No, a purge is a confession of failure." The scriptorium is a symbol. Its perfect, unassailable silence is as important as what it contains. We must perform a surgery, not an amputation. We will find the core of the memory contagion, the idea that is replicating, and we will cut it out. Then, we will re-sanctify the rest. Her plan was a masterpiece of inquisitorial precision. She would not descend with a company of stormtroopers. She would go with a minimal retinue. Kale, a blank known as a soulless due to the chilling void that surrounded him, and 2 tech priests specialized in noetic counter-intrusion. They would walk the stacks, and they would listen not for screams, but for silence that was too perfect, for order that was too eager. The truth, when hunted properly, always betrayed itself by trying too hard to appear as a lie. Their landing craft touched down in the central arboretum, a vast, hollow space where ancient, genetically stunted trees reached for artificial sunlight. The reception committee was there. Custodian Sergeant Rorken and a handful of senior archivists, including Elara and Gorvin. Their bows were correct. Their expressions were masks of weary relief underlaid with grief. Valeria's eyes, gray and cold as glacial ice, scanned them. She saw the fatigue, the stress lines, the pallor, but she also saw a curious lack of fear. There was dread, yes, and sorrow, but not the frantic, guilty terror of heretics caught in their sin. It was the resignation of patients, showing their scars to a surgeon they knew must cut again. "Inquisitor," Rorken saluted, his voice firm. "The scriptorium is secured. The anomalous event was tragic but limited. We stand ready to assist your audit." "Limited," Valeria repeated, the word hanging in the recycled air. "A class, Theta Cognitohazard Breaches Containment, results in the death of your warden, and you describe it as limited." She began to walk, forcing them to fall in beside her as she moved towards the great adamantine doors of the main stack. "Take me to the locus, the oubliette of echoes." The procession was silent, but for the clink of armor and the rustle of robes. As they entered the main stacks, Valeria's senses, honed by a lifetime of perceiving the unseen, stretched out. The air was thick, not with dust, but with psychic residue, a cacophony of faded screams, stifled sobs, and shocking, fleeting glimpses of joy, all pressed flat and silent under layers of enforced order. It was as she expected. But there was something else, a current beneath the stillness, a sense of sharing. Normally, in such a place, each archivist was an island, mentally barricaded against their charges. Here, she felt faint, gossamer threads of shared understanding, glances that carried volumes, a collective weight born in silence. They reached the oubliette. The door had been crudely resealed with adamantine welds over the broken stone. Valeria gestured, and one of the tech priests extended mechadendrites, probing the seal. The breach was physical and psychic. The priest buzzed. Significant noetic backwash registered. The null fields have been re-established at 94.7% efficiency. "Open it," Valeria commanded. The welds were cut. The door, scarred and heavy, was hauled aside. The chamber within was pristine, sanitized by chemical and psychic cleansers. The bodies were gone. The crystal pedestal stood empty, the daemon shard having been moved to a more secure location. Only the plain stasis casket labeled Psi Alpha remained, humming softly on its shelf. Valeria ignored it for the moment. She walked to the spot where the logs indicated Archivist Tertius had fallen. She knelt, running a gloved finger over the seamless floor. There was no stain, no mark. But her mind, brushing against the spot, felt not emptiness, but a peculiar fullness, a completed circuit, a silence that was not absent of sound, but rich with a meaning that had been fully expressed. "He remembered something here," she murmured more to herself than anyone. And then he stopped. Her gaze lifted and swept the room. finally landing on the Archivists clustered at the door. Her eyes locked with Gorvin's. In his, she saw the deep, tired wisdom of a man who has read the last page of a terrible book. Not defiance, not guilt, just acknowledgement. "You," she said, standing. "Archivist Gorvin. The logs show you were one of the last to interact with Tertius before his shift end on the day of the breach. What did you speak about?" Gorvin's answer was slow, measured. "The burdens of our duty, Inquisitor. The weight of the secrets we keep." He seemed pensive, but dedicated. "We all feel the weight." "A politic answer," Valeria said, taking a step closer. The soulless, a gaunt figure in gray, moved subtly to her flank, his null presence making the air taste of ash. "But this is not a political inquiry. A memory killed him. A memory killed your warden. A memory has left its fingerprints on the minds of every soul in this complex. I can feel it, like a scent on the wind." What idea did Tertius discover, Gorvin? What truth was so beautiful or so terrible that it could not be contained? The room grew colder. Ilara looked at the floor. Rorkin's hand drifted towards his sidearm. Gorvin simply sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. He looked not at the Inquisitor, but at the casket marked Psi Alpha. "He discovered, Inquisitor," Gorvin said, his voice clear and devoid of all pretense, "that we are not archivists, we are undertakers, and that the thing we have been burying is not our enemy's history, but our own." He was not attacking. He was not confessing. He was simply stating a fact, as one might note the temperature. In that statement, Valeria heard the echo of the core contagion. It was not a specific image of a dead world. It was the realization about the nature of the Imperium itself. A meta-memory. A truth about truth. That was why the reports were so clean. The infected weren't hiding specific data. They were hiding a new, unanimous state of understanding. The scriptorium hadn't been cleansed. It had been converted. Valeria's mind raced. A full purge was now the only option. But Gorvin's calm, and the similar resolve in the faces of the others, told her it was already too late. You cannot purge an idea that is already rooted. It was like trying to purge the concept of water from a flooded room. "You have allowed this realization to spread," she accused, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "No, Inquisitor," Gorvin replied, a faint, tragic smile touching his lips. "We have allowed it to remember itself, and like all memories deemed forbidden, it is now looking for new places to live, beyond these walls." The horror of it fully dawned on Inquisitor Valeria then. The target was not the scriptorium. The scriptorium was the patient zero. The outbreak had already entered the lymphatic system of the Imperium. Archivists with transfer orders. Scribes with new postings. The contamination was mobile. It was in the wild. She turned to Kale, her voice sharp and final. "Custodian Rorkin, you are relieved. All personnel of the Scriptorium Mortis are hereby quarantined, effective immediately. No one leaves. No signals go out." She looked back at Gorvin, at Ilara, at the others. "You will submit to mind. Wipe, all of you. We will scrape your skulls clean back to the basal substrate." Gorvin nodded as if he had expected nothing less. "You can wipe our minds, Inquisitor. But who will wipe yours? You have now remembered what we remember. You have heard the idea. It is in you too." He was right. She could feel it. A cold, logical virus integrating itself into her worldview. The Imperium's fear was not of Xenos or chaos. It was a fear of self-awareness. The knowledge was doing its work. It was simply being remembered. The quarantine was an act of brutal, desperate theater. The great adamantine doors of the Scriptorium Mortis cycled shut, with a final, resonant boom that echoed through the vaulted halls like a funeral bell. Void seals engaged, and the facility transitioned from a repository to a prison tomb. Inquisitor Valeria's orders were absolute, enforced by her impassive retinue and the now compliant custodians, whose loyalty shifted to the highest authority in the room with the grim logic of a machine. Yet, as Valeria stood in the Warden's spire, now her command center, the victory felt like ash in her mouth. Gorvin's words were a worm in her mind. "You have now remembered what we remember." She had the core idea that the Imperium was founded on a mandated, terrified amnesia, was not a vivid pic capture or a sensory memory. It was a structural truth, a lens that warped every piece of data she had ever processed. Looking at the hololithic display of the secured facility, she no longer saw a bastion of sacred silence. She saw a monument to institutionalized cowardice. The silence was not holy, it was guilty. "Interrogator KL," she said, her back to him as she stared at the schematics. "Initial assessment of containment viability." KL's voice was characteristically grim. "Physical containment is total. No signals have escaped since our arrival. However, the Archivist Gorvin's statement suggests mimetic dispersal prior to our lockdown. We must assume the contagion is beyond these walls." "We must do more than assume," Valeria replied, turning. Her face was a mask of cold fury. But the fury was directed inward, at the part of her that found the heretical idea compelling. "We must act. The scriptorium is lost. It is a hive of the infected. Standard mind wipe on this scale is impractical. The risk of the engramic surgeons themselves being contaminated is too high." Kale understood the implication. His hand rested on the grip of his hell pistol. "A final purge, then. Cleansing fire. It is the only guarantee." Valeria nodded once. A sharp, mechanical motion. "But first, we need the vector index. We need to know which archivists left, where they were going, what they knew. Their transfer orders, their personnel files, their psych evaluations. We will burn this nest, then hunt every bird that flew from it. The record in the Warden's data core will have the information. Extract it." As Kale moved to the central cogitator bank, Valeria looked down into the main atrium through the armor-glass viewport. Below, custodians herded small groups of gray-robed archivists towards the auxiliary chapels that were being converted into holding cells. There was no struggle, no protest. The archivists moved with a quiet, terrible dignity, like a condemned regiment marching to a trench they had already mentally occupied. Their compliance was more unnerving than any rebellion. It was the behavior of those who have already accepted their fate, and in doing so, have transcended the Inquisition's power to terrorize them. Below, Ilara walked in a line with others. She carried nothing, her hands folded before her. As she passed a particular junction, a nondescript archway leading to the secondary hydroponics wing, she paused for a fraction of a second. Her eyes did not dart. She did not signal. She simply let her gaze rest on a specific crack in the ferrocrete floor. A flaw she had passed 10,000 times. But now, that flaw was a mnemonic trigger. It held the memory of a whispered plan, of names and destinations shared in the dark. Finn, Administratum Sector Thor, Merrick, Munitorum Depot on Versal. Others scattered like seeds on the solar wind. The knowledge was not stored on a data slate. It was stored in the architecture itself, in a shared, silent understanding between the infected. The Inquisition could scour the data cores, but they would only find official, sanitized records. The real index was in the glances, the sighs, the collective memory of the broken collective. In the spire, Kale worked the cogitator. "The data is corrupted, Inquisitor," he reported, frustration edging his tone. "The transfer logs from the past 7 days show gaps, duplicate entries, erased clearance codes. It's a patchwork. Someone has expertly muddied the trail." "Not someone," Valeria said, still watching the archivists below. "Them. All of them. They didn't just hide the truth in their minds. They hid it in the paperwork. They used the Imperium's own bureaucracy as their stasis casket." A perverse flicker of admiration cut through her horror. It was the perfect crime for an archivist. "We can attempt data recovery, but it will take time we may not have," Kale said. "The psychological pressure within the sealed environment is increasing. The serenity of the infected is destabilizing the custodians. They report feelings of doubt, of pointless cruelty. The idea is spreading," Valeria thought, "even through Vox channels and reports. It wasn't just a memory, it was a tone, a mood, a philosophical stance that was contagious through mere description. The soulless, standing immobile in the corner, was the only thing keeping the immediate air clear of its psychic taint. "Time is a luxury we are denied," Valeria stated. She made her decision. Prepare the cyclonic torpedo protocols. Set the reactor for a core meltdown cascade. We will collapse the entire asteroid facility into its own heart. Total atomic annihilation. Nothing will survive. No memory, no data, no trace of the idea. Kyle saluted. It will be done. Estimated time to full charge and sequence. 1 hour. 1 hour, Valeria echoed. 1 hour, until she erased a 10,000-year-old institution from existence. 1 hour, until she murdered hundreds of illuminated broken souls who had done nothing but understand. The weight of the act was immense, yet the logic was impeccable. It was the only way to be sure. She left the spire, descending into the stacks one final time. She needed to see it, to fix the image of the place in her mind before she destroyed it. The silence now was different. It was a waiting silence. The usual dread of the place had been replaced by a profound collective melancholy. She passed a cell where a young archivist sat on the floor, humming a tune that was not from any Imperial hymnal. It was sweet and sad, a folk melody from a world that no longer existed, remembered by a stone that no longer sang. The custodian guarding the door shifted uncomfortably, his grip tight on his weapon, fighting not the archivist, but the unwanted pang of nostalgia the tune evoked. Valeria reached the door to the oubliette once more. She entered alone. The casket, Psi Alpha, sat on its shelf. The first memory, the void, the foundational fear. She approached it, not as an inquisitor now, but as a fellow archivist of a darker truth. She knew she should destroy it. A melta-charge would reduce it to slag. But something stayed her hand. To destroy it was to confirm its power. To be afraid of it, to leave, it was to let it be annihilated with the rest. A passive acceptance of the purge. In the end, she did nothing. She merely stood before it, and in the absolute quiet, she let the idea fill her completely. The Imperium was afraid. It was afraid of its past, of its choices, of the blood-drenched mirror. Its strength was the strength of a trauma victim who has built a fortress to never feel again. Its piety was a desperate prayer to forget. And she, Valeria, was its chief rememberer of things that must be forgotten. The contradiction was exquisite and fatal. She left the oubliette, sealing it behind her. The final minutes were counting down. Klaxons would soon blare, signaling the mandatory feudal evacuation for the handful of inquisitorial personnel. The archivists would hear it in their cells. They would know what it meant. They would meet the fire not with the Emperor's name on their lips, but with the memories of 100 murdered truths in their hearts. Their silence, in the end, would be the most damning confession the Imperium could never afford to hear. As she walked back to the spire to oversee the final act, Inquisitor Valeria realized Gorvin was right. The mind wipe would not work on her. The idea had rooted. She would execute her duty. She would destroy the scriptorium. She would spend the rest of her life hunting the escaped archivists with a fanatic zeal. But she would do it all with the grim, unshakable knowledge of why. She had become what the Imperium feared most, a believer who understood the lie. The knowledge was killing her, too. Not with a scream, but with a slow, cold, and infinitely patient silence. The final klaxon was a raw, mechanical shriek that tore through the curated silence of the Scriptorium Mortis. It was not a signal for evacuation. There were no escape pods for the condemned. It was a funeral dirge played on a brass horn, a 10-minute warning for the reactor's death throes. In the holding chapels, the sound washed over the gathered archivists. They did not cry out. They did not pray. Some closed their eyes. Others looked up at the vaulted ceilings, as if seeing the sky of a forgotten world. Archivist Ilara felt the vibration in the stone bench beneath her. She thought not of the coming fire, but of the cool, damp weight of the riverstone from Avalos, and the green sky it held within. It was a better memory to die with than any Imperial creed. In the spire, Inquisitor Valeria watched the countdown on a giant brass chrono. 7 minutes. Her ship, the Judicious Penance, had already severed physical docking lines and pulled back to a safe distance. Only her retinue and a skeleton crew of custodians remained, soon to evacuate via a fast lighter. The plan was clean, absolute. Yet, the silence from the cells below was a louder indictment than any scream. Interrogator KL approached, his helmet under his arm. The lighter is prepped. Reactor cascade is irreversible. All inquisitorial personnel are accounted for. He paused. The infected show no signs of psychic distress. If anything, the bioscanners indicate elevated peace. Valeria did not turn from the chrono. They have accepted a truth we are still burning worlds to outrun. Of course they are at peace. The words were heretical. She no longer cared. The idea had finished its work in her. It had separated the function of her duty from the soul that performed it. She was a weapon firing on autopilot. Give the order for final fallback. We leave in 3 minutes.
As the orders were relayed, a junior custodian burst onto the command platform, his voice tight with confusion. "Sir, we have a situation at Primary Stack Junction Theta 7. One of the holding chapel doors is open." Kale's head snapped around. "Open? Ow." "It was open from the inside, sir. The locking mechanism was understood. They used a manual override sequence that hasn't been in the protocols for 2 centuries. They must have pulled it from the architectural memory core." A cold spike of understanding drove into Valeria's heart. They used the memory of the building itself. The Archivists weren't just using their own minds. They were using the scriptorium as a reference library for their rebellion. "Which Archivist?" she demanded. It was a coordinated action. "Inquisitor, from multiple cells. They're not trying to escape, they're gathering." 5 minutes. Valeria grabbed her help pistol. "With me?" They moved down through the spire's core, the scream of the klaxon a constant companion. The corridor to Primary Stack Junction Theta 7 was empty. The door to a large chapel yawned open. Inside, they were not huddled in fear. Nearly 50 archivists stood in a loose circle in the center of the chapel floor. At their center was Gorvin. They were not speaking, they were remembering. Together, the air in the room was thick, not with the promise of violence, but with the presence of profound, shared recollection. A custodian squad had the entrance covered, weapons raised, but they held their fire, unsettled by the profound stillness of the scene. "Gorvin," Valeria's voice cut through the klaxon's wail. "This is pointless. The cascade cannot be stopped. Your lives are measured in minutes." Gorvin turned slowly. His face was serene. "We know, Inquisitor. We are not here to stop it. We are here to witness it, and to be witnessed." "What are you talking about?" "You are going to erase us," Gorvin said, his voice carrying calmly. "You will erase this place, but you cannot erase the act of erasure itself. That, too, is a memory. That, too, is a truth. The violent suppression of truth is a form of its preservation. You are making our final argument for us." He gestured to the archivists around him. "Each of us holds a shard of a forbidden truth, a lost culture, a hidden genocide, a moment of beauty deemed heretical. Alone, they are fragments. But here, now, in our last moments, we are sharing them, not by speaking, but by remembering. Together, in one place, we are creating a confluence, a psychic eddy. When the fire comes, it will not just destroy bodies, it will annihilate 50 minds, all holding these specific, concentrated truths at the exact same moment of catastrophic violence." Valeria's blood ran cold. She saw it. It was a psychological weapon of terrifying elegance. They were turning their own execution into a psychic bomb. The simultaneous, violent death of so many memory bearers, all focused on the same core revelation of imperial sin, would create a psychic backblast, a screaming echo in the warp that no null field could fully mute. It wouldn't carry data, it would carry meaning. It would be a ghost of pure, undeniable context, a last, defiant act of remembrance that would leave a scar on the local Imperium, a silent scream that any passing psyker for millennia might faintly hear as a whisper of why. "You're trying to create a martyr's beacon," Valeria whispered, horrified and awestruck. "Lo," Gorvin corrected gently, "we are becoming an archive one final time. You burn libraries, Inquisitor, but the smoke itself tells a story. Our smoke will tell the story of why you light the match." 2 minutes. Kale raised his pistol. We can't cut the confluence short. Execute them now. Disrupt the focus. Valeria held up a hand. It was too late. The focused will of 50 illuminated minds, resigned to death and fixed on a singular, tragic truth, was already a palpable force. Shooting them would only add the sharp punctuation of their individual deaths to the narrative. It would be part of the story. Fall back, she said, her voice hollow. To the lighter, now, Inquisitor. That is an order, she roared, the last shred of her authority fueled by the need to not be part of their final, terrible poem. Everyone, fall back. The custodians and the retinue retreated, confusion and relief warring on their faces. Valeria was the last to leave the junction. She looked back at the circle of gray robes, their heads now bowed not in submission, but in intense, communal recollection. Corvin met her eyes one last time and gave a small, sorrowful nod, not of triumph, but of acknowledgement. They were, in the end, fellow scribes. She recorded events with fire and steel. He recorded them with memory and sacrifice. She turned and ran. The lighter blasted away from the docking port, the scriptorium asteroid shrinking to a jagged pearl against the void.
The chrono in her retinal display hit 0. The asteroid did not explode outward. It imploded. A silent, furious light bloomed at its core, visible for a fraction of a second before the entire massive structure collapsed in on itself like a paper ball crushed in a giant fist. Matter was annihilated in the reactor's heart. No debris, no sound, just a violent, absolute erasure. But on the lighter's bridge, every psi-sensitive individual, Valeria included, flinched as if struck. It was not a sound. It was a conclusion, a final, deafening chord in a symphony of silence. A psychic shockwave of pure, unadulterated loss, but a loss that carried within it the perfect, preserved image of what had been lost. It was the memory of the scriptorium itself, and in that memory, the ghostly after-image of 50 minds holding a light up to the dark, just before the dark swallowed them. Inquisitor Valeria steadied herself against a console. The deed was done. The facility was gone. The immediate threat was contained. But as the judicious penance recovered its lighter and prepared for the long hunt ahead, she knew the truth. They had not contained the idea. They had weaponized it. They had turned the Archivists from keepers of silent truths into authors of a screaming, ghostly testament. The hunt for the escaped few would continue. But now she hunted with the certain, grim knowledge that the very act of hunting was proof of the crime. The Imperium feared its own Archivists. And now, in a silent corner of the void, a new reason for that fear echoed where no one could hear it. And in the warp, where memory and emotion are reality, a new and tragic star had flickered into being, casting a light that revealed only the shape of the surrounding darkness. The judicious penance hung in the silent gulf between stars, a predator resting in the void. On the strategium, hololithic star maps flickered, their soft light the only illumination in the dark chamber. Inquisitor Valeria traced a line with her finger from the vanished coordinates of the Scriptorium Mortis to a blinking rune marking the hive world of Solon Secundus. The trail was not one of energy signatures or astropathic whispers. It was a trail of bureaucratic entropy, of subtle inconsistencies in the endless data flow of the Imperium. Archivist Finn's transfer to the Administratum Sector Thor had been logged, approved, and processed with impeccable regularity. But the psych evaluation, attached to mandatory formality, contained a single anomalous phrase. Under motivational drives, where most scribes wrote, "Service to the God Emperor," or "Purification of data," Finn had written, "To ensure the proper weight is given to all variables." It was innocuous, professional. But to Valeria, who now perceived the hidden language of the infected, it screamed, "Wait." The word Tertius had used, the concept of the memory stone. Finn was carrying his truth, and it was leaking into his paperwork. "He's here," Valeria stated, her voice dry as tomb dust. "On Solon Secundus, he will be in the bowels of the Hive Prime Data Fortress, trying to give proper weight to the records of a planetary grain tithe from 3 centuries ago. He will be altering nothing. He will simply be remembering it differently." Interrogator Kyle stood beside her, his face harder than ever. "We can take a full strike team, extract and eliminate before he can contaminate the local data sphere." "No," Valeria said, her eyes fixed on the rune. "A strike team is a sledgehammer. The infection is a vapor. We go in quietly. We observe. We understand the method. Only then do we excise." Days later, they walked the endless, vaulted halls of the Hive Prime data fortress on Solon Secundus. The air was a constant, dry hum of cogitators and the rustle of vellum. Millions of scribes bent over their stations, their quills scratching a symphony of forgetting onto miles of parchment. Valeria and Kyle, dressed in the severe robes of senior audite, moved unseen through the river of labor. The Solus was left aboard the ship. His presence was a beacon of wrongness here. They found Finn not through tracking, but by atmosphere. In a subsector devoted to agricultural yields, there was an island of peculiar quiet. He sat at a standard scribe station, a mountain of musty ledgers before him. His movements were slow, deliberate. He was not copying numbers, he was reading them. And as he read the dry statistics of the plague-tainted harvest of M39, the quantities condemned, the populations rationed, the subsequent quarantine actions, his pen would occasionally hover, and a single fat tear would drop from his eye, smudging the ink not with correction, but with salt water. He was not changing the record. He was grieving for it. He was giving it weight. A junior scribe delivering a new ledger recoiled slightly, unnerved by the silent weeping of the old man. The emotion was the contaminant, a psychic mold growing on the sterile data. "He has made himself a living monument," Valeria murmured from the shadow of a pillar. "The data is unchanged, but the context, he holds the context. He remembers the faces that went with the rationing figures. He remembers the sound of the quarantine guns. He is not a heretic altering history. He is a man refusing to let history be meaningless. That is far more dangerous." They took him that night, in his sparse hab cell. He offered no resistance. When Valeria placed a psych-dampening collar around his thin neck, he looked at her with eyes that held an ocean of sorrow. "You cannot dampen a memory that is just a memory, Inquisitor," he said. "You can only dampen the fear of it, and I am not afraid. I am sorry." Back aboard the Judicious Penance, in a sterile interrogation cell, Finn sat calmly. Valeria did not employ pain prods or neural scourges. She sat across from him, the memory of Avalos. "You carry it." "A fragment," Finn nodded. "The sound of the rain on the fungal caps. The way it made the whole forest seem to breathe. I carry that. And I carry the memory of the 83rd Solon Regiment's final action during that plague quarantine. They were ordered to fire on civilians trying to break the cordon for food. The official record listed as successful containment of infected vectors. I remember the look in their lieutenant's eyes as he gave the order. He was a good man, destroying himself to serve a terrible logic. That look, it has the same weight as the rain on Avalos. "You are trying to create empathy between two disconnected tragedies," Valeria said, understanding dawning. "You are building bridges of feeling across the chasms of Imperial data. Empathy is the memory of the species, Inquisitor," Finn said. "You have tried to splice it out of our genome, but it grows back, in the cracks, like moss." He was not spreading a specific heresy. He was rehabilitating the emotional context the Imperium had surgically removed. He was making the data hurt again. And in the Imperium, pain that served no purpose was the greatest heresy of all. Valeria ordered a mind wipe. It was performed by a servitor-assisted chirurgeon, its tools gleaming under the cold light. Finn's body survived the procedure. He woke, his eyes empty of sorrow, empty of recognition. He was given a new identity and assigned to a neutral data entry pool on a barren mining world. The fragment of Avalos's reign and the lieutenant's torment were gone, but as the report was filed, Valeria noticed something. The chirurgeon's log noted standard engrammic excision successful, but the servitor's mechadendrite, the one that performed the actual synaptic pruning, had in its post-op maintenance cycle etched a tiny, irregular pattern into its own casing, a pattern that matched the fall of rain on a forest canopy. The memory had no psychic power, it was just a pattern, but it had jumped hosts, from Finn's mind to the servitor's mechanistic memory buffer, a ghost in a machine. The idea found a way. The hunt continued. They caught Archivist Merrick on the Munitorum depot world of Versal. He had not altered a single weapon shipment, but the way he oversaw the loading of ballistic missiles onto a troop ship was with a ritualistic, mournful care, as if handling sacred relics of a lost, violent faith. He was remembering the specific death each one would cause, not as a statistic, but as a unique extinction of a world. He was contaminating the act of war with the gravity of its consequence. They caught him. They wiped him. But in the depot's ledger, the line item for that shipment was annotated with a tiny, drawn icon, a stylized tear by a junior clerk who could not explain why she had drawn it. Each success was a failure. Each excision proved the virus's resilience. Valeria's fleet became a ghost ship, chasing echoes. They would arrive, perform a clean, clinical purge, and leave, only to find the idea, not the memory, but the style of remembrance. The attribution of weight had already seeped into the surrounding bureaucratic ecosystem in small, untraceable ways. A change in tone in a report, an unusual pause in a clerk's recitation, a piece of folk art found scratched into a plascrete wall. Years bled into decades. Valeria grew old in her armor, her hair steely gray, her face a landscape of grim certainty eroded by a creeping, unacknowledged doubt. The hunt was her entire existence. But she was no longer hunting to protect the Imperium. She was hunting to understand the thing she had become. She was the living embodiment of the fear. She was the answer to the question posed by the first memory. She was the proof that the only way to maintain the void of forgetting was through endless, self-consuming violence. One night, in her austere quarters, she received a packet. It was not delivered by courier. It was simply on her desk. It was a simple, gray stone, a river stone, unmarked. With it was a slip of parchment with a single line in familiar, elegant script. The final archive is the one you carry. G. Gorvin. It was impossible. He was atomic ash. And yet, she picked up the stone. It was cool and smooth. She felt nothing. No psychic imprint. No memory of Avalos. It was just a stone. And then she understood. It was not a container. It was a symbol. A mnemonic trigger for her own memories. For everything she had witnessed. The peace of the rememberers. The defiant circle in the chapel. The weeping of Finn. The mournful care of Merrick. The 1,000 tiny resurgences of empathy she had spent her life stamping out. The stone asked for nothing. It simply was. And in its mundane, eternal existence, it reminded her that some truths are not carried in the mind, but in the actions taken because of them. She did not destroy the stone. She placed it on her desk, a paperweight, for the endless, bloody reports she would continue to file until her dying day. In the heart of the Imperium, on Terra itself, a very old scribe in the deepest catacombs of the Administratum finished his shift. He had done nothing remarkable for 50 years. As he rose, his stiff joints aching, he glanced at a crack in the wall near the floor. It was shaped, vaguely, like a leaf from a tree that had never grown on Terra. He allowed himself a small, private smile that touched no other part of his face. Then he turned out the lumen and shuffled into the dark, carrying a perfect, silent memory of green and rain, and a weight that no one would ever be able to erase. The Imperium feared its own archivists, for they were the keepers of the one thing mightier than armies, more enduring than faith, and more dangerous than any heresy, the memory of what was, and the silent, terrible question of what could have been.